The schoolhouse bell rang 3 times at precisely 3:15 on that Tuesday afternoon in October 1887, its familiar tone echoing across the small town of Black River, Massachusetts. Naomi Foster stood at the doorway of the one-room schoolhouse, her slender figure framed by the autumn light as she watched her students scatter like leaves in the wind, their laughter fading into the distance. At 32, Naomi had been teaching in Black River for nearly a decade, her dark hair now threaded with premature strands of silver, her eyes carrying the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen more of life than most in this isolated corner of the Commonwealth. The town of Black River sat nestled between rolling hills and dense pine forests, 40 miles from Boston, but separated by more than mere distance. Founded by timber merchants in the early 1800s, it had grown prosperous from the seemingly endless supply of lumber, but prosperity had come at a cost. The surrounding forests had receded year by year, and with them, something ineffable had changed in the character of the place. The townspeople spoke less of it now, but the older residents still remembered when the forest had pressed close to their homes, when the wind through the pine needles had sounded almost like whispered conversations. Naomi gathered her books and papers, carefully organizing them in the leather satchel her father had given her when she'd first accepted the teaching position. Thomas Green, the chairman of the school board, had visited her that morning before classes began, his hat clutched in his hands, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Miss Foster," he had said, clearing his throat with evident discomfort. "The board has decided to bring in a new teacher from Boston, a man with university credentials. Progress, you understand." She understood perfectly. For years, she had battled the board over her teaching methods, her insistence on teaching girls advanced mathematics, her refusal to use the rod for discipline. They had tolerated her only because no qualified man had been willing to take the modest salary offered in such a remote location. Now, it seemed, they had found someone. "When?" she had asked, her voice steady despite the hollowness spreading in her chest. "End of the month. The board thanks you for your years of service, of course." Of course. 10 years of dedication dismissed with a perfunctory expression of gratitude. Naomi had merely nodded, turning away to prepare for her students' arrival, determined they would not see how deeply the news had wounded her. Now, as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the empty classroom, Naomi methodically wiped the chalk from the blackboard, the dust motes dancing in the slanting sunlight. On the board, she had written a passage from Emerson that morning. "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." The words seemed to mock her now. The creak of the floorboards announced a visitor. Naomi turned to find Elizabeth Harding standing hesitantly at the back of the classroom. At 16, Elizabeth was Naomi's oldest and brightest student, a girl with a hunger for knowledge that reminded Naomi of herself at that age. "Miss Foster? May I speak with you?" "Of course, Elizabeth. Please come in." The girl approached, her fingers nervously intertwining. "I overheard my father talking with Mr. Green last night about the new teacher." Her eyes, earnest and troubled, searched Naomi's face. "Is it true? Are you leaving?" Naomi gestured to a bench, and they sat together in the quiet of the emptying afternoon. "It seems I am. Not by choice, but yes." "But why? Everyone knows you're the best teacher Black River has ever had." A sad smile touched Naomi's lips. "Not everyone shares that opinion, I'm afraid. The board believes a male teacher with formal university training will better prepare the children for the modern world." "The modern world," Elizabeth repeated with unexpected bitterness. "My father says the same thing when he talks about sending my brother to college while I stay here to help my mother. As if half the world should remain in darkness while the other half moves forward." Naomi placed a gentle hand on the girl's arm. "The world is changing, Elizabeth, even here in Black River. Perhaps not as quickly as we might wish, but change is coming." She hesitated, then added, "I've applied for a position at a progressive women's academy in Concord. If I'm accepted, there might be a place for you there as well." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Leave Black River? My parents would never allow it." "Perhaps not now. But in a year or two, when you're of age, Naomi let the possibility hang between them. Think on it. The choice will be yours to make when the time comes. After Elizabeth left, Naomi remained seated, watching as the last light of day retreated from the classroom. Tomorrow would bring another day of teaching, one of her final 20 in this room that had been the center of her life for so long. She would face it with dignity, her students never suspecting the uncertainty that lay ahead. What she couldn't know as she finally gathered her belongings and locked the schoolhouse door was that the coming days would unravel in ways none in Black River could have foreseen, that forces long simmering beneath the surface of the town's respectable facade were about to break free, like a river changing course after years of quiet erosion. And when they did, Naomi Foster would find herself swept along in their current, her life altered beyond recognition. As she walked home along the familiar path, the wind picked up, rushing through the distant pines with a sound almost like voices calling her name. Naomi pulled her shawl tighter and quickened her pace, unaware that she was walking toward a future that would test everything she believed about herself and the community she had come to call home. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Subscribing means you'll never miss another powerful story that challenges you to think more deeply about the human condition and the hidden forces that shape our lives. The Foster family home stood at the edge of Black River, a modest 2-story structure of weathered clapboard and stone that had sheltered 3 generations. Naomi's father, Jacob Foster, had been the town's only doctor until his death 5 years earlier, leaving Naomi and her mother, Margaret, to maintain the house and the small plot of land behind it. That evening, as Naomi approached the white picket fence that bordered their yard, she paused to collect herself, unwilling to bring her troubles across the threshold and burden her mother. Margaret Foster sat in her usual place by the front window, her fingers working deftly at a piece of mending, despite the arthritis that had begun to twist her joints. At 67, she retained the straight-backed posture and keen intelligence that had once made her the most respected midwife in the county before illness had forced her to relinquish her calling. "You're late today," Margaret observed without looking up from her work. "The green boy broke his arm again?" Naomi hung her shawl on the hook by the door. "No, just some papers to grade." The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but she wasn't ready to speak the truth aloud, to make it real through the telling. "I'll start dinner." In the kitchen, Naomi moved through the familiar ritual of preparing their evening meal, drawing water from the pump, stoking the stove, peeling potatoes with practiced efficiency. Through the window, she could see the Hardings' house across the street, where lamplight already glowed in the windows. She thought of Elizabeth, of the girl's hunger for a life beyond the narrow confines of Black River, and felt a renewed determination. Perhaps losing her position was not an ending but a beginning, a chance to seek out a place where her ideas about education would be valued rather than merely tolerated. The sound of the front door opening interrupted her thoughts. Her mother's voice, normally measured and calm, held an unmistakable note of excitement. "Naomi, come quickly. We have a visitor." Setting aside the knife, Naomi wiped her hands on her apron and made her way to the front room, where she stopped short at the threshold. Standing beside her mother was a tall man in a travel-worn suit, his hat held respectfully in his hands. It took her a moment to recognize him. "James?" The name came out as little more than a whisper. James Calloway's face broke into a smile, the same crooked, warm expression she remembered from years ago, though now framed by a neatly trimmed beard. "Hello, Naomi." 12 years had passed since she had last seen him, since the day he had left Black River to make his fortune in the West, promising to return for her. 6 years since his last letter, after which silence had fallen like a curtain between them. She had mourned him, accepted his loss, rebuilt her life around his absence, and now he stood in her mother's parlor as if conjured from memory. "What are you doing here?" The question came out more sharply than she had intended. James's smile faltered slightly. "I've come home." Those simple words hung in the air between them, weighted with all that remained unsaid. Margaret, sensing the tension, smoothly intervened. "James arrived on the afternoon coach. He's purchased the old Miller property by the river." "Isn't that wonderful news?" The Miller property, Once the grandest house in Black River, now fallen into disrepair after old Samuel Miller's death 3 winters past. It sat on 5 acres overlooking the river, isolated enough to offer privacy, yet close enough to town for convenience. "That's quite an investment," Naomi said carefully. "What brings you back after all this time?" Something flickered across James's face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or caution. Business, primarily, and personal matters too long delayed. His eyes held hers steadily. "I've established a timber company in Oregon. We're looking to expand eastward, and I thought Black River would be a natural choice, given my familiarity with the area." "I see." Naomi was acutely aware of her mother watching this exchange with undisguised interest. "Well, I'm sure the town will welcome the investment. If you'll excuse me, I need to finish preparing dinner." "Of course." James reached for his hat. "I should be going anyway. There's much to do at the house." He turned to Margaret. "Thank you for your warm welcome, Mrs. Foster." "Nonsense, you'll stay for dinner," Margaret insisted. "Naomi always makes too much for just the two of us, and you can tell us all about your adventures in the West." Before Naomi could protest, her mother had taken James's hat and coat and steered him to a chair by the fire. With no graceful way to object, Naomi retreated to the kitchen, where she leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. James Calloway, here now, after all these years. The timing seemed almost deliberately cruel, coinciding with the unraveling of her carefully constructed life. Dinner was an exercise in careful conversation, with Margaret asking questions about Oregon and James's business ventures, while Naomi maintained a polite but distant manner. James spoke of the timber industry, of the vast forests of the Northwest that made Black River's woods seem like little more than a garden in comparison. He had done well for himself. That much was clear from his clothes, his confident manner, the gold watch chain that caught the lamplight when he gestured. "And you never married?" Margaret asked with the directness of the elderly, ignoring Naomi's warning glance. James set down his fork. "No, ma'am. My work has consumed most of my attention these past years." "Well, it's fortunate you've returned when you have," Margaret continued. "Our Naomi is about to embark on a new chapter herself. The school board—" "Mother, please," Naomi interrupted. "I'm sure Mr. Calloway isn't interested in local gossip." James looked between them, curiosity evident in his expression. "On the contrary, I'm very interested in catching up on everything that's happened in my absence." His gaze settled on Naomi. "Including your plans." Cornered, Naomi briefly explained the situation with the school board, careful to present it as a natural progression rather than the dismissal it truly was. "I'll likely be leaving Black River at the end of the month," she concluded. "There are opportunities elsewhere for someone with my experience." "That seems a waste," James said, his brow furrowing. "From what I recall, you were always passionate about teaching here, about giving the children of Black River more than their parents had." The accuracy of his memory unsettled her. "Things change, Mr. Calloway. People change." "James," he corrected gently. "After all these years, surely we can dispense with formalities." After dinner, as Margaret retired to her room with a convenient headache, James helped Naomi clear the table, moving with surprising domesticity for a man who had spent the last decade in mining camps and timber operations. "Your mother hasn't changed," he observed with a smile as he handed her a plate to dry. "In some ways," Naomi agreed. "In others, she's frailer than she appears. The rheumatic fever took more from her than just her strength." They worked in silence for a moment before James spoke again. "I owe you an explanation, Naomi, about the letters that stopped." She kept her eyes on the dish in her hands. "You owe me nothing. We were young, with young people's dreams. Life took us in different directions. Is that what you believe happened?" Now she did look up, meeting his gaze directly. "What else should I believe? You wrote less and less frequently, and then not at all. I waited, James. For 2 years after your last letter, I waited." He set down the cup he had been washing, his expression grave. "I wrote to you every month for those 2 years, Naomi. Every single month." The implication of his words took a moment to register. That's not possible. I received nothing after your letter about the new timber claim in '81. Yet I sent them, more than 20 letters that apparently never reached you. His voice held no accusation, only a deep sadness. When no reply came, I eventually convinced myself you had moved on, perhaps married. Naomi shook her head slowly, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Who would intercept letters, and why? I don't know, but I intend to find out. There was a new firmness in his tone. Along with several other matters that seemed to have changed in Black River during my absence. Later, after James had gone and the house had settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Naomi sat at her bedroom window, looking out toward the distant line of pines silhouetted against the night sky. Missing letters, James's sudden return, her dismissal from the school. Separately, each might be explained away as coincidence or the natural course of events. Together, they suggested hidden currents moving beneath the placid surface of Black River, currents that threatened to pull her under if she didn't learn to navigate them. Outside, the wind picked up, bending the branches of the old oak tree beside the house. In the distance, barely visible in the darkness, the pine forest seemed to shift and sway, as if beckoning. For a moment, Naomi felt a strange longing to walk into those woods, to lose herself among the ancient trees that had stood witness to the town's history long before the first axe had bitten into their kin. She turned away from the window and began to prepare for bed, her mind still churning with questions. Whatever forces were at work in Black River, she would face them with the same quiet determination that had carried her through all the challenges of her life.
And perhaps, just perhaps, she would finally uncover the truth that seemed to lie just beyond her reach, like a shadow glimpsed from the corner of one's eye. The Black River Town Hall stood at the center of Main Street, its white columns and red brick facade projecting an air of permanence and authority.
Built in the early days of the town's prosperity, it housed not only the municipal offices, but also the meeting rooms where the various boards and committees gathered to govern the community's affairs. On Thursday evening, as dusk settled over the town, the windows of the second-floor meeting room glowed with lamplight, silhouetting the figures of the 7 men who comprised Black River's school board. Naomi stood in the shadows across the street, observing the gathering with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. She had not been invited to this meeting. Indeed, she had only learned of it through Elizabeth Harding, who had overheard her father discussing it. Yet the knowledge that these men were even now deciding the particulars of her replacement, perhaps even accelerating her departure date, had drawn her here like a moth to flame. Curious place for a woman to be loitering at this hour. Naomi started at the voice, then relaxed as she recognized James emerging from the darkened doorway of Caldwell's general store. I might say the same about you, she replied, grateful for the dim light that hid the flush she felt rising to her cheeks. He moved to stand beside her, his gaze following hers to the illuminated windows. The school board meets tonight, he said, not a question, but a statement. Yes. She hesitated, then added, I wasn't invited. Nor was I, though my tax dollars will presumably fund whatever decisions they make. James studied the building thoughtfully. I wonder what else they discuss behind those closed doors. There was something in his tone that caught Naomi's attention. You suspect something improper? Let's just say I've been asking questions since my return and the answers have been inconsistent. He glanced down at her. Did you know the town has sold timber rights to over 5,000 acres of forest in the past 5 years? The figure startled her. That can't be right. The town commons only encompass about 1,000 acres of woodland. Precisely. Yet the records show multiple sales, all approved by the town council, for parcels that, when mapped, extend well beyond the town's official boundaries. James's voice dropped lower, though there was no one nearby to overhear. Some of the land appears to include portions of the Wampanoag Reservation to the north. The implications of this were staggering. The Wampanoag had been granted their reservation lands through a colonial-era treaty that even the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had consistently upheld. If Black River officials were selling timber rights to those lands, it constituted not only a moral breach but potentially a legal one as well. Who purchased these rights? Naomi asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. On paper, various companies from as far away as New York. But when I followed the corporate registrations, most lead back to a single holding company, Northeastern Timber Enterprises. James paused. The majority shareholder is Thomas Green, the chairman of the school board, the man who had informed Naomi of her dismissal with such practiced regret. A cold anger began to unfurl within her, directed not just at Green but at the entire system that enabled such men to profit at others' expense while maintaining a veneer of respectability. "We should go," James said suddenly, taking her elbow. "Someone's coming out." They retreated further into the shadows as the town hall doors opened, spilling yellow light onto the steps. Thomas Green emerged first, followed by the other board members. From their vantage point, Naomi and James could hear fragments of conversation carried on the evening air. Sooner rather than later, the Calloway situation complicates matters. "He's just one man. If he becomes troublesome, there are ways to handle it." "And the teacher, Foster's daughter?" "Already taken care of. By month's end, she'll be gone." The men dispersed, some heading toward the Black River Inn for their customary post-meeting drinks, others making their way home to their families, leaving Naomi and James standing in stunned silence. "It seems I'm considered a situation," James said finally, his attempt at lightness failing to mask the tension in his voice. "And I've been taken care of," Naomi replied, the words bitter on her tongue. "But why? What threat could I possibly pose to their plans?" James turned to face her directly. "Perhaps because you're one of the few people in town who might question their actions, who might notice if forest that shouldn't be cut suddenly disappears." His expression softened slightly. "Or perhaps because of your connection to me." The implication hung between them, a reminder of their shared past and the feelings that, despite years of separation, had never been properly laid to rest. "We need to know more," Naomi said decisively, "about these timber deals, about what's really happening in Black River." "Agreed. But we'll need to be careful. These are powerful men with much to lose if their arrangements come to light." James offered his arm. "May I walk you home? It's getting late." As they made their way through the darkening streets, Naomi was acutely conscious of the eyes that might be watching from behind curtained windows, of the whispers that would inevitably spread through town by morning. A respectable spinster teacher seen walking with a man after nightfall, it would be fodder for gossip regardless of the circumstances. Yet at that moment, such concerns seemed trivial compared to the larger issues at hand. "What do you intend to do?" she asked as they approached her home, the lights from the front parlor indicating her mother was still awake. James stopped at the gate, his expression grave in the moonlight. "Continue my investigation. I have contacts in Boston who can help determine the legality of these timber sales, and I need to speak with the Wampanoag Council to see if they're aware of what's happening on their land. And if they're not, then I'll inform them, and help them seek legal remedy if that's what they choose." He hesitated. "What about you, Naomi? You said you'd be leaving Black River soon." The question caught her off guard. In the rush of discoveries, she had momentarily set aside her own uncertain future. "I don't know. The Academy in Concord hasn't responded to my application yet. And now there's more at stake than just your position," James finished for her. "I understand. But please, promise me you'll be cautious. If Green and his associates are willing to sell land that isn't theirs to sell, there's no telling what else they might do to protect their interests." The warning sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. "I'm always cautious, James." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "No, you're not. You're brave and principled, and those qualities, admirable as they are, can be dangerous in the current climate." He took her hand briefly, his touch warm despite the coolness of the night. "Just be aware, and know that you're not alone in this." After he had gone, Naomi lingered at the gate, her mind racing with the implications of all she had learned. Black River had always seemed such a straightforward place, its social hierarchies and power structures visible and understood, if not always just. Now she was beginning to glimpse something else. A shadow town existing alongside the one she knew, where deals were made in secret, and those who might interfere were systematically removed. Inside, she found her mother dozing in her chair by the fire, an open book resting in her lap. Margaret stirred as Naomi entered, blinking owlishly in the lamplight. "You were gone a long while," she observed, her tone carefully neutral. "I walked to clear my head," Naomi replied, helping her mother to her feet. "Come, it's late. You should be in bed." As she assisted Margaret up the stairs, supporting her mother's increasingly frail frame, Naomi found herself wondering how much the older woman knew or suspected about the undercurrents moving through Black River. Margaret Foster had been born in this town, had seen its growth from a small settlement to a prosperous community. She knew its history, its families, its secrets. At least those that had existed before her illness had confined her largely to their home. "James Calloway seems to have returned with purpose," Margaret remarked, as Naomi helped her into her nightgown. "He's not the same young man who left." "No," Naomi agreed. "He isn't. Be careful, daughter." Margaret's hand, gnarled with arthritis but still strong, gripped Naomi's wrist with surprising force. Black River has changed too. There are those who would not welcome questions about certain matters. Startled by the echo of James's warning, Naomi searched her mother's face. "What do you know about this, Mother?" Margaret released her grip and settled back against her pillows, suddenly looking every one of her 67 years. "Only what your father suspected before he died, that the town's prosperity came at a higher price than most realized, that some of the most respected men in Black River had built their fortunes on foundations that wouldn't bear close inspection." She closed her eyes briefly. "He began asking questions, and then he fell ill." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Naomi had never questioned the official explanation for her father's death. Pneumonia, contracted during a harsh winter when he had pushed himself too hard tending to his patients. But now, in light of everything else she had discovered, a seed of doubt took root. "You think," she began, but her mother cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I think nothing. I know nothing. And that is how we have survived these past years." Margaret's expression softened. "But you have your father's conscience, Naomi, and now, perhaps, an ally in James. Just remember that in Black River, the wind carries more than just the scent of pine." With those cryptic words, Margaret closed her eyes, a clear dismissal. Naomi retreated to her own room, where she sat at her small writing desk and, by the light of a single candle, began to document everything she had learned. If what she and James suspected was true, if the town's leaders were indeed selling timber rights to land that wasn't legally theirs to sell, then proof would be essential. As she wrote, the wind rose outside, rattling the window panes and sending the candle flame dancing. From the forest that bordered the town to the north came a low, persistent sound, not quite a howl, not quite a moan, but something in between. The pines were restless tonight. Naomi paused in her writing, pen hovering above the paper as she listened. In that moment, the thought came to her unbidden. If you've been watching this story unfold, what do you think is hiding in the shadows of Black River? Is it merely human greed and corruption, or something deeper rooted in the town's history? Leave your thoughts below, for the truth is often revealed in the questions we dare to ask. The thought passed as quickly as it had come, and she returned to her notes, unaware that the forces she was beginning to uncover had been set in motion long before her birth, and that the reckoning approaching Black River would test not only her courage, but her deepest understanding of justice and mercy. The Boston Public Library stood as a monument to human knowledge, its grand facade and vaulted ceilings inspiring the same reverent silence one might find in a cathedral. Naomi moved through its hushed corridors with purpose, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpets that lined the reading rooms. It had taken considerable planning to make this journey, a fabricated story for her mother about visiting a potential employer in Concord, careful arrangements for Margaret's care during her absence, and the early morning coach that had delivered her to the city just as the library opened its doors. At a massive oak table beneath one of the arched windows, Naomi spread out the materials she had gathered. Copies of land records from the Black River Town Clerk's office, obtained through a ruse about researching local history for her students. maps of Massachusetts showing the boundaries of the Wampanoag Reservation, and notes from her conversations with James about the timber contracts. She had chosen the library not only for its comprehensive archives, but also for the anonymity it provided. Here, she was just another scholar pursuing research, unlikely to encounter anyone from Black River who might question her activities. James had offered to accompany her, but they had agreed it was safer to work separately. He focusing on the legal aspects through his contacts in the city, she tracing the historical documentation that might prove their suspicions correct. The morning passed in painstaking examination of property records and treaty documents. By noon, Naomi's eyes ached from squinting at faded script, but her efforts had yielded results. The original treaty establishing the Wampanoag Reservation, signed in 1763, clearly defined boundaries that included nearly 3,000 acres of pine forest north of Black River, forest that, according to the town records, had been parceled out and sold to timber interests over the past 5 years. Even more damning, she discovered a clause in the town's original charter specifying that any land transactions involving property adjacent to the reservation required approval not just from the town council, but from the Commonwealth's Office of Indian Affairs. No such approvals appeared in the records she had examined. Naomi carefully copied the relevant documents, her handwriting neat and precise despite her growing excitement. This was evidence, not conclusive perhaps, but compelling enough to warrant further investigation. If she and James could bring these discrepancies to the attention of state authorities. "Miss Foster? What a surprise to find you here." The voice jolted her from her concentration. Naomi looked up to find Richard Caldwell standing beside her table, his tall frame casting a shadow over her papers. The owner of Caldwell's General Store was also Black River's postmaster and a member of the town council, and, she now realized with a sinking feeling, one of the men who had been present at the school board meeting she and James had observed. "Mr. Caldwell." She managed a smile while discreetly covering her notes with a blank sheet of paper. "I'm conducting some research for a teaching project." His eyes moved over the documents spread before her, lingering on the corner of a map that remained visible. "In Boston? Our town library couldn't accommodate your needs?" "The resources here are more comprehensive." Naomi began gathering her papers, trying to appear unhurried. "Are you in the city on business?" "Yes, some meetings with suppliers." Caldwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thomas Green is with me as well. We were just discussing Black River's promising future over lunch when I spotted you through the window." The mention of Green sent a jolt of alarm through her. "How fortunate. Please give him my regards." "Why not do so yourself? We're dining across the street. I'm sure Thomas would be delighted if you joined us." It was a trap, thinly disguised as courtesy. If she accepted, she would be subjected to questions about her presence in Boston, perhaps even pressured to reveal what she had discovered. If she declined too forcefully, she would only heighten their suspicions. "That's very kind, but I still have much to accomplish here." Naomi rose from her seat, papers now safely tucked into her satchel. "Another time, perhaps." Caldwell's hand came to rest on the back of the chair she had just vacated. "Research is hungry work. Surely you can spare half an hour." Before she could formulate another polite refusal, a new voice entered the conversation. "Ah, Miss Foster, there you are. I've been looking everywhere." James Calloway approached from the direction of the reference desk, his expression pleasantly neutral, as if finding her in conversation with Caldwell was the most natural thing in the world. "Mr. Calloway," Naomi said, relief flooding through her. "I was just explaining to Mr. Caldwell that I'm rather pressed for time today." James nodded understandingly. "Of course. We have that appointment at the State House in—" He made a show of checking his pocket watch. 20 minutes. We should leave now to ensure we're not late." Caldwell's demeanor shifted subtly, a tightening around the eyes that betrayed his displeasure. "The State House? What business brings you there?" "Just some paperwork regarding my property," James replied smoothly. "Miss Foster has kindly agreed to assist me, given her familiarity with local records." It was a plausible explanation, offered with such casual confidence that even Naomi might have believed it had she not known better. Caldwell seemed to weigh his options, clearly reluctant to let them depart, yet unable to press further without revealing his own suspicions. "Another time, then," he conceded finally. "Enjoy your afternoon. I'm sure we'll all have much to discuss when we return to Black River." The subtle threat beneath his cordial tone was unmistakable. Naomi nodded politely and allowed James to escort her from the reading room, conscious of Caldwell's eyes following their departure. Once outside on the library steps, she released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you. Your timing was impeccable." "Not entirely," James replied grimly, guiding her down the steps and away from the library entrance. "I spotted Green and Caldwell entering the restaurant across the street earlier. When Green remained but Caldwell left, I suspected he might have seen you through the window." "He did, and now they know we're both in Boston, apparently working together." Naomi clutched her satchel tighter. "This complicates matters." James glanced over his shoulder, checking for any sign of pursuit. "It does, but it also confirms we're on the right track. They wouldn't be concerned unless there was something to hide." He offered his arm. "We do actually have an appointment, though not at the State House. My attorney is meeting us at his office in half an hour." They moved briskly through the crowded streets, Naomi matching James's long strides despite her heavy skirts. Boston pulsed with energy so different from the measured pace of Black River, carriages and omnibuses crowding the thoroughfares, pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks, the air thick with the mingled scents of coal smoke, horses, and humanity. Under other circumstances, Naomi might have enjoyed the vitality of the city, so at odds with the quiet routine of her rural existence. Now she was simply grateful for the anonymity it provided. The offices of Harrington and Wells occupied the third floor of a respectable building near the financial district. James led Naomi up a narrow staircase to a door bearing the firm's name in gold lettering. Inside, a clerk ushered them into a well-appointed meeting room where an elderly gentleman with shrewd eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard awaited them. "Miss Foster, may I present Mr. Wells, my attorney and trusted advisor." James made the introduction as the older man rose from his seat. "Mr. Wells, this is Miss Naomi Foster of Black River." "A pleasure, Miss Foster." Wells's handshake was firm, his assessment of her swift but thorough. "James speaks highly of your intelligence and determination, qualities that may prove essential in the matter at hand." Over the next hour, Naomi presented her findings while Wells listened attentively, occasionally interrupting with precise questions that revealed his sharp legal mind. James added his own discoveries: corporate records showing the complex ownership structures of the timber companies, bank transfers linking Green and other council members to the proceeds from the land sales, and, most disturbingly, evidence suggesting that several state officials had been paid to look the other way. When they had finished, Wells sat back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You've compiled a compelling case," he said after a thoughtful pause. "The treaty violations alone would warrant an investigation by the Federal Indian Commission. Add the financial irregularities and the apparent collusion of state officials, and you have the makings of a significant scandal." "But," James prompted, clearly hearing the reservation in the attorney's voice. "But scandals of this nature are delicate matters, particularly when they involve respected community leaders and potential government corruption." Wells's expression was grave. "If you pursue this, you must be prepared for resistance, not just from those directly implicated, but from a system that often protects its own." "What would you advise?" Naomi asked. "Consolidation of evidence. Specifically, we need the original timber contracts showing the exact boundaries of the land being sold." Wells turned to James. "You mentioned these are kept in the town clerk's safe?" "Yes, according to my source on the council. Access is restricted to authorized officials." Wells nodded thoughtfully. "Without those contracts, we have suspicions but not proof. With them, we could approach the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts." He looked between them. "I don't need to tell you the risks involved in obtaining such documents." "No," James agreed. "You don't." The implication hung heavily in the air. What Wells was suggesting, perhaps not explicitly, but clearly nonetheless, was that they would need to acquire the contracts through means that might not be entirely legal. The thought should have alarmed Naomi, should have offended her sense of propriety and respect for the law. Instead, she felt a steely resolve forming within her. If the institutions meant to protect justice were compromised, perhaps justice needed to be pursued by other means. "There's one more thing," Wells added, his tone shifting. "These timber sales, they're substantial, but not unprecedented. What troubles me is the timing and the specific parcels involved." He spread a map on the table, indicating a region north of Black River. "This area contains the watershed for 3 counties. Control these forests, control the water rights, and in a drought, water becomes more valuable than timber." "There's been talk of a reservoir," Naomi said suddenly, remembering conversations she had overheard in town. "A project to supply water to Boston's growing population." "Precisely." Wells tapped the map. "The Metropolitan Water Commission has been quietly acquiring land throughout the Commonwealth. If Green and his associates control this territory when the commission comes looking to expand the water supply, they stand to make a fortune," James finished, "far beyond what the timber alone would yield." The pieces were falling into place, revealing a scheme more calculated and far-reaching than Naomi had initially imagined. This wasn't merely opportunistic corruption, but a strategic plan years in the making, one that exploited the Wampanoag, the citizens of Black River, and potentially the entire Commonwealth for the benefit of a few well-positioned men. As they left Wells's office, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the busy streets. James hailed a carriage to take them to the train station, where Naomi would catch the evening service back to Black River. "What now?" she asked as they settled into the carriage, their voices low despite the privacy it offered. "I'll remain in Boston for another day to consult further with Wells. There are legal preparations we can make before we obtain the contracts." James's expression was resolute. "When I return, we'll need to devise a plan to access the town clerk's office." The reality of what they were contemplating, effectively breaking into a government office to steal documents, struck Naomi anew. "This isn't what I expected when I began asking questions about my dismissal from the school." James's hand found hers in the dimness of the carriage. "No, but I think your father would be proud of your courage in pursuing the truth, regardless of where it leads." The mention of her father, of the questions he had begun to ask before his sudden illness, reinforced her determination. If he had indeed been silenced for threatening to expose corruption, then completing his work was not just a matter of justice for the Wampanoag or the people of Black River, but a daughter's duty to her father's memory. At the train station, as the conductor called for boarding, James held her gaze with an intensity that spoke of more than their shared mission. "Be careful, Naomi. Green and Caldwell will have reported our meeting in Boston. They'll be watching you closely. And you," she reminded him, "you have more to lose than I do with your business interests and property." His smile held a touch of irony. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I have more to gain." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Not all treasures are measured in dollars and cents." The words lingered with Naomi as the train pulled away from the platform, James's figure growing smaller until it disappeared from view. In the gathering dusk, as the Massachusetts countryside rolled past her window, she contemplated the path that lay ahead. They were no longer simply seeking answers, they were actively challenging a corrupt system, with all the dangers that entailed. And yet, beneath her apprehension, Naomi felt something else, a sense of purpose more vital and meaningful than anything she had experienced in years. Teaching had been her calling, her way of shaping the future through the minds of her students. But this was justice in its most direct form, a stand against those who would exploit the vulnerable and despoil the land for their own gain. As the train whistle pierced the evening air, Naomi opened her satchel and reviewed her notes one final time, committing the most crucial details to memory. The evidence they had gathered was damning but incomplete. To complete the puzzle, they would need the original contracts, and to obtain those, they would need to venture into territory where the line between right and wrong blurred, where the law as written might not align with the deeper principles of justice. The October moon hung low over Black River, casting long shadows across the town square as Naomi made her final preparations. 2 weeks had passed since her return from Boston, 2 weeks of careful observation, whispered conversations with James, and growing certainty that time was running short. Thomas Green had accelerated the timeline for her replacement. The new teacher would arrive in just 3 days, not at month's end as originally planned. Tonight would be their only chance to access the contracts in the town clerk's office. The Harvest Festival had drawn most of the town to the fairgrounds on the southern edge of Black River, including Clerk Wilkins, whose fondness for apple cider was well known throughout the county. "Are you certain about this?" James asked, his voice barely audible as they crouched in the shadows behind the town hall. "Once we cross this line..." "I crossed that line the moment I discovered what they've been doing," Naomi replied, her breath visible in the autumn chill. "The question is whether justice matters more than laws written to protect the powerful." James studied her face in the moonlight, then nodded once. "Your father would indeed be proud." The lock on the side entrance yielded to James's skilled manipulation, a talent acquired during his years in mining camps where security was often a personal responsibility. Inside, the building lay silent and dark, their lantern, shuttered to reveal only the barest sliver of light, casting eerie shadows on the wood-paneled walls. The clerk's office occupied the east corner of the ground floor, its door locked but less formidable than the exterior entrance. Within minutes, they stood amid the meticulous records of Black River's official business, the massive iron safe looming against the far wall. "This will take longer," James murmured, examining the safe's mechanism. "And I can't guarantee success." "We have to try," Naomi insisted, already sorting through the desk drawers for anything that might aid their efforts. The combination eluded them for nearly an hour, tension mounting with each failed attempt. Finally, in a leather-bound volume labeled Municipal Codes 1880-1885, Naomi discovered a sequence of numbers penciled on the inside cover. Not a combination, perhaps, but a date: 10/17/83. "October 17th, 1883, she whispered, "the day the council approved the first timber sale." James tried the sequence, and with a soft click that seemed deafening in the quiet room, the safe door swung open. Inside, organized with the same precision that characterized all of Wilkins's work, lay folders containing the town's most sensitive documents. They quickly located the timber contracts, confirming their worst suspicions. The boundaries clearly encroached on Wampanoag land, and the signatures of several state officials had been forged to create the appearance of proper authorization. As they carefully copied the most damning sections, a noise from the hallway froze them in place. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, approaching the office. "Someone's coming," James mouthed, already moving to secure the contracts back in the safe. "We need to go. Now!" But it was too late. The door swung open, revealing Thomas Green flanked by Richard Caldwell and Sheriff Harmon. The latter's hand rested ominously on his holstered pistol. "Well, well," Green drawled, his expression a mixture of triumph and contempt. "It seems our concerns were well-founded, gentlemen. Breaking and entering, theft of confidential documents, serious charges indeed." "Not as serious as land fraud and treaty violations," Naomi countered, clutching the papers they had copied, "or the exploitation of an entire community for personal gain." Green's smile never wavered. "Strong accusations from someone in your position, Miss Foster. But who do you imagine will believe the desperate claims of a dismissed schoolteacher caught in the act of burglary?" He gestured to Sheriff Harmon. "Arrest them both." "I wouldn't recommend that, Sheriff," James said calmly, producing a folded document from his coat. "This affidavit, already filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston, details everything we've discovered. Mr. Wells has instructions to proceed with federal charges if we don't return by morning." Uncertainty flickered across Green's face. "You're bluffing, Calloway." "Perhaps. Are you willing to take that chance? To risk federal marshals descending on Black River, examining every record, questioning every transaction?" James's voice remained steady. "Or would you prefer to negotiate?" The standoff stretched into tense silence before Green finally spoke again. "What exactly do you want?" "Justice for the Wampanoag. Restoration of their lands." and a full accounting of the money that should have gone to the town treasury instead of private pockets. James met Green's gaze without flinching. In exchange, we keep this matter from becoming a public scandal. Impossible, Caldwell interjected. The contracts are signed. The timber is being cut as we speak. Then stop it, Naomi said fiercely, before more damage is done. The confrontation might have ended there with tense negotiations and reluctant concessions, had fate not intervened in the form of a sudden commotion outside. Shouts, the clatter of horses' hooves, and the unmistakable glow of firelight painting the night sky orange. Sheriff Harmon moved to the window. "Fire!" he exclaimed. "In the North Woods. The timber camp." Green's composure shattered. "The whole harvest! My God, it's gone!" They rushed outside to find the town in chaos, people streaming from the harvest festival toward the northern edge of Black River, where flames leapt among the distant pines. The fire, driven by the same wind that had whispered through the trees for generations, was consuming the very forest that Green and his associates had fought to control. In the confusion, Naomi made a decision that would forever alter her path. As James was drawn into the emergency response, his experience with timber operations suddenly valuable, she slipped away, the copied documents secure in her satchel. But rather than returning to her mother's house, she turned north toward the burning forest and the Wampanoag Reservation beyond. She had nearly reached the tree line when a figure emerged from the shadows. Elizabeth Harding, her face streaked with soot, her eyes wild with a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Miss Foster, you shouldn't be here." "Elizabeth, what have you done?" Naomi asked, though she already suspected the answer. The girl straightened, defiance replacing her momentary uncertainty. What needed to be done? They were cutting trees that have stood for centuries, trees that belong to the Wampanoag, to all of us. I heard my father talking about tonight's shipment, how it would be the largest yet. She faltered. I didn't mean for it to spread so quickly. The wind, the implications were staggering. Elizabeth, her student, the bright, questioning girl who had always pushed boundaries, had taken direct action where adults had hesitated. "Go home," Naomi urged, gripping the girl's shoulders. "Now. Tell no one you were here, no one what you did." "But Miss Foster." "Go." Once Elizabeth had disappeared into the night, Naomi faced the forest alone. Behind her lay Black River, the town that had been her home for all her 32 years, now illuminated by the distant glow of burning timber. Before her stretched the ancient pines, their shadows beckoning like outstretched arms. In that moment, Naomi Foster made her choice. With the evidence that could expose Green and his conspirators clutched against her chest, she stepped into the forest, letting the darkness envelop her as she moved steadily northward toward the Wampanoag lands where justice might still be possible. The fire burned for 3 days, consuming not only the illegally harvested timber, but also the camp where Green's men had established their operations. By the time it was contained, the landscape had been transformed. Charred stumps where mighty pines had once stood, the scent of ash replacing the sweet resin that had perfumed the air for generations. Of Naomi Foster, no trace was found. Some said she had perished in the fire, though no remains were ever discovered. Others whispered that she had fled to Boston, or perhaps even farther west, carrying the evidence of Black River's corruption to authorities who might act upon it. James Calloway searched tirelessly, retracing her likely path through the forest, consulting with Wampanoag trackers who knew every ridge and hollow. But even they could find no sign of her passage beyond the burned section of woods, as if the teacher had simply vanished into the pines themselves. In time, Black River rebuilt, different, perhaps better in some ways. The scandal, though never reaching the courts, forced changes in leadership. Thomas Green resigned from the school board and town council, his timber empire collapsing as investors withdrew their support. The Wampanoag, armed with knowledge of the attempted theft of their lands, secured stronger protections for their territory. And on nights when the wind blew from the north, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of winter, those who ventured near the forest's edge sometimes spoke of hearing a woman's voice among the trees. Not frightening, but resolute, a teacher still imparting wisdom to those willing to listen. Elizabeth Harding, who eventually fulfilled Naomi's hopes by attending the Women's Academy in Concord, would return to Black River years later as an educated woman determined to continue her mentor's legacy. On her first night back, she walked to the edge of the regrown forest and stood listening to the wind in the pines. "I've watched this far," she whispered to the darkness. "I've carried your lessons forward, and I've never forgotten what you taught us all, that some truths are worth any price." Some said it was merely imagination, but Elizabeth would always insist that the wind changed in that moment, wrapping around her like an embrace before rushing deeper into the forest, carrying her words to wherever Naomi of Black River had finally found her peace. If you've watched this far, it's because you like this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. And if this tale of courage and sacrifice in the face of corruption moved you, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who appreciates stories that remind us how the quiet strength of one principled person can change the course of history.